The door to Miller's bar creaked open with a long, aching groan, and every conversation inside came to a slow stop. Sunlight spilled through the doorway, slicing across wooden floors stained with decades of spilled drinks and memories too heavy to name. And in that golden slice of light stood Emily Miller, 18 years old, barely 5 feet tall, dressed in jeans, a plain jacket, and sneakers that squeaked with every step. She looked like a college student who'd taken a very wrong turn off the highway. But she wasn't lost. She was right where she meant to be. Inside the bar sat the Liberty Riders Motorcycle Club. Veterans, truckers, welders, small business owners, men and women with weathered faces, tattooed arms, and steel-toed boots. Most were over 50, a few closer to 70. A few chuckles rippled through the room as they turned to see who'd just walked in. "Sweetheart, you sure you're in the right place?" someone called. Emily's heart hammered in her chest, but she held her ground. Her voice was steady. "I'm here for the Liberty Riders. I have a proposal." That brought real laughter. Someone joked about Girl Scouts selling cookies. Tyler, a rider in his late 30s with ink covering both arms, leaned back in his chair and muttered, "This should be good." Before she could speak again, a sound rolled in from outside, a low, familiar rumble. Not just any bike, a Harley with a custom rhythm that the riders recognized like a heartbeat. Conversations died mid-sentence. The room shifted. And then came the man himself, Jack Miller. He was 62, silver in his beard, still strong across the shoulders. He wore a leather vest faded by time, the club's patch across the back, and beneath it, one small but heavy line, "Founding Member, 1973. Jack didn't speak right away. He just looked at his daughter, then at the room, and nodded. "Dad," Emily said, quiet but clear. And just like that, everything changed. Later that evening, after the tension had cooled and the introductions had been made, Emily sat at the edge of her bed in the spare room at her father's house, staring at the notebook in her lap.
She had made it past the laughter. She had made it through the door. But the journey hadn't really begun, not until the morning after. They left before sunrise. The fall air was crisp, the sky a soft wash of gray and orange. Emily wore borrowed gear and clung tightly to her father's back as the Harley roared down Route 9. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with the weight of everything she wanted to learn. The ride was not romantic. Her legs cramped within the first hour. Her lower back ached by the second. Her fingers were numb from the wind, even through her gloves, but she didn't complain. She just held on and watched the road unwind in front of her, like a ribbon of stories waiting to be told. After nearly 3 hours, they pulled into a rest stop just outside of town. Emily stumbled off the bike, trying to hide the stiffness in her knees. That's when Susan approached, 61, short gray hair, tough eyes softened by time. She handed Emily a bottle of water. "First long ride always kicks your tail," Susan said, lighting a cigarette. "I'll get used to it," Emily replied, maybe too quickly. Susan studied her a moment. "Your dad tell you why they let me in?" Emily shook her head. 1980, Susan said. "My husband rode with this club. He died on this highway. Drunk driver came over the line. I showed up to his memorial ride wearing his vest. Nobody knew what to say to me. I told him I wasn't leaving, told him I was going to carry what he left behind." She took a slow drag. "Took 2 years before they stopped looking at me like I was just a ghost wearing his clothes. I didn't change their minds. I just kept showing up." Emily nodded, her throat tight. She understood. This wasn't about riding motorcycles. It was about showing up, again and again, with your pain, with your story, and with the courage to be seen anyway. Far behind them, the road stretched out like a map of all the things Emily didn't yet know. But she was here. She had started, and that meant something. The second week on the road settled into a rhythm. Emily learned how to shift her weight on the curves, how to stretch during gas stops without drawing attention, and how to listen. That last part was the most important, because the Liberty Riders were not loud when it came to the things that truly mattered. Their stories didn't pour out. They were offered in pieces, quietly, like folded flags handed to grieving families. One afternoon, they stopped at a small diner just outside Jefferson County. The place had faded curtains, strong coffee, and the kind of silence that only came from people who didn't need to fill it. Jack and a few of the older members sat at the corner booth, their voices low. Emily sat alone at the window, flipping through her notebook, when Walter slid into the seat across from her. Walter was 74, his face a road map of sun and sorrow, and his Liberty Rider's vest had more patches than leather. He sipped his coffee, looked at her, and said simply, "You want a story? I'll give you one." She put her pen to the page, and he began. 1969. My little brother Jimmy and I bought matching bikes with money we'd saved up hauling junk. He had this grin, like the world couldn't touch him. 3 months later, a tire blew on I-40. He didn't come home. Walter stared into his coffee like the rest of that memory was still trapped in the steam. 2 days after the funeral, Jack found me in my garage. I was sitting on the floor with a bottle in one hand and Jimmy's helmet in the other. Jack didn't say a word, just sat with me. Next day, he came back, and the next. Eventually, he told me that Jimmy wouldn't want his bike gathering dust. He dragged me out for a ride. That's when I learned what this club really was. Not a gang, not a weekend hobby, just people who know that grief moves easier when the wheels are turning.
Emily nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. These were not just men in leather. They were witnesses to each other's pain. They carried not just memories, but entire lives that never got a chance to finish their story. That evening, back at the clubhouse, Emily sat quietly in the corner while others played pool and swapped jokes. She listened for those silences between laughter, places where the real stories lived. Her phone buzzed, a message from her mom checking in. She replied, then glanced up to see Jack stepping outside to take a call. Through the dusty window, she could see his back stiffen. A long pause, then a slow nod. When he came back inside, Walter met him near the bar. "That who I think it was?" Walter asked. Jack nodded. "Yeah, Mike." The name traveled through the room like a change in the weather. Even Emily recognized it. She'd heard it once, maybe twice, always spoken low, always followed by silence. After 15 years, Mike was reaching out. Said he'd seen the club's website, saw that Jack's daughter was riding, said it got him thinking about the old days. Tyler, who had always been a bit standoffish toward Emily, stepped out from the back and frowned. "Mike's got no place here anymore. He made his choice." Jack exhaled deeply. We all made choices. The next day, Emily was alone at the clubhouse, transcribing interviews. When a bike pulled up outside, she glanced through the window. A man in his mid-50s stepped off a well-worn bike, no club colors, just black leather and a heavy past in his eyes. He paused at the door like it was holy ground. Then he stepped inside. "You must be Emily," he said. She stood, unsure. "You're Mike." "I am. I figured showing up was better than calling again." Moments later, Jack arrived. He froze at the sight of Mike's bike, then walked inside with slow, steady steps. They stood just a few feet apart. Mike spoke first. "Coffee?" Jack nodded. "Yeah, coffee'd be good." Within the hour, the clubhouse was full. Word spread fast in the Liberty Riders. Mike's return wasn't just personal. It was part of their shared history. Walter greeted him with a hug. Susan, quieter, offered a nod. Tyler arrived last. His voice was sharp. "My father died thinking you betrayed this club."
The room went still. Mike didn't flinch. Your father and I had different visions. I wanted to build a support network for returning vets, Iraq, Afghanistan. He thought that meant turning the club into a charity. I thought it meant making the club matter. Jack's voice broke the tension. And I stayed quiet, thought being neutral meant keeping peace, but my silence chose a side. You needed me, and I left you hanging. Mike's voice softened. You were my best friend, Jack. I didn't need you to agree with me. I just needed you to stand beside me. They both looked older in that moment, not just from the years, but from the weight of everything unsaid. Walter finally spoke. For what it's worth, we did start that outreach program. 3 years after you left. Tyler's dad fought it, but it's real. We've helped a lot of young guys find their footing. Mike's face cracked into something close to a smile. You did it! Not the way you planned it, Susan added, but yeah, it's there. Emily watched her father's face shift. Regret, surprise, maybe even relief. So many years had passed, and yet here they were, mending something that had never truly healed. The days that followed moved like wheels on old pavement, steady, sometimes rough, but always forward. With Mike back in the fold, something shifted in the air around the clubhouse. Not everyone spoke it out loud, but you could feel it in the way people lingered longer after rides, in the way conversations grew a little deeper, a little more honest. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about acknowledging that healing didn't always come with an apology. Sometimes it arrived quietly, with presence. Jack called an emergency meeting the following week. The clubhouse was packed. Even riders who hadn't shown up in months came out for it. Jack stood near the old map pinned to the wall, routes marked in faded red, patches from past rides, thumbtacked like constellations. I want to move the memorial ride up, he said. Do it next month instead of waiting until May. Walter raised an eyebrow. Why the rush? Jack looked at Emily, seated near the back with her notebook in her lap. Because we've got everyone here now. Because waiting for perfect means we miss what's already good. Because sometimes honoring the fallen means not waiting for a headstone to tell their story. No one objected. Preparations began the next morning. Emily found herself busier than she had expected, interviewing members, photographing patches, learning the difference between a vest that was just worn and one that was sacred. Susan invited her to the sewing room behind her house, a quiet space filled with leather, needles, and silence broken only by the hum of old memories. This patch, Susan said, holding up one with frayed edges, was Jimmy's, Walter's brother. Lost him in '69. She set it down gently. This one, Derek's father, Bull, died in '04. Her fingers paused on a smaller patch. And this was our first loss, 1973. Kid named Casey, 19 years old. We were just figuring out what the club meant back then. Emily didn't interrupt. She just captured it all. The hands, the thread, the weight of remembering. Legacy, she realized, wasn't about statues or speeches. It was about who kept the needle moving after others were gone. In the evenings, Jack and Mike worked on an old Sportster in the back garage, the same one Mike had left behind when he walked away years ago. The engine hadn't run in over a decade, but that didn't seem to matter. They moved in rhythm, passing tools like old musicians who still remembered the chords. Sometimes they talked. Mostly, they didn't need to. One night, Emily overheard something she hadn't expected. Tyler had stopped by to check on the ride routes. He lingered a moment, then asked Mike quietly, "You still believe in that outreach thing?" Mike nodded. "I do." "You think it ever really made a difference?" Mike didn't hesitate. "I know it did. Your father and I disagreed on how to do it. He wanted to protect the Brotherhood. I wanted to grow it. We were both right and both wrong." Tyler stared at the floor. He never told me he was proud, not once. Jack looked up from the engine. His voice was low. Some men, war takes the words right out of them, leaves only action. Tyler took a breath. Then maybe I have to be different. The night before the ride, Susan called Emily to the clubhouse alone. Inside, the core members were waiting. Jack, Walter, Mike, Susan, and even Tyler. On the table sat Jack's original leather vest. It looked older than the club itself, worn soft by decades of wind, sun, and time. Jack stepped forward. "You've done more than take notes. You've listened. You've helped us remember who we are." He picked up the vest and held it like something sacred. "This has been mine since the first ride. Every mile, every brother, every loss, it's all here." Emily's voice caught. "Dad, I can't wear that." "You can, and you will, but we're going to add to it first." Susan opened her sewing kit. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who knew the weight of what she was stitching. Beneath Jack's name, in clean thread, she sewed a second name, Emily Miller. When she finished, she held it up. 2 names, 2 generations, 1 unbroken line. Emily didn't speak. She just nodded, her eyes full. The weight of the vest in her hands wasn't heavy, it was grounding. The ride began at dawn. 73 bikes rolled out from the clubhouse, the largest memorial ride in Liberty Riders history. News had spread through veteran networks, neighboring clubs, and across dusty phones rarely checked but always answered when it mattered. They rode as one, chrome shining, leather creaking, engines rumbling like thunder rolling over open land. Emily rode up front, beside her father, her vest zipped tight against the wind. Mike was on Jack's other side, Walter behind them, and Susan and Tyler, and a line of riders stretching farther than she could see. When they reached the cemetery, the group gathered at the memorial stone etched with names, some known, some remembered only in stories. Walter spoke first, then Susan, then others stepped forward, speaking names like prayers. Finally, Jack turned to Emily. "You ready?" She opened her notebook. Her voice was calm, but carried. "I came here to study a motorcycle club. What I found was a family built from broken pieces, a community where healing rides alongside grief, where men and women carry stories in patches, in engines, in silence, and sometimes in tears." She paused, then continued. "Legacy isn't choosing between past and future. It's stitching them together, steady hand by steady hand, refusing to let the thread break." And no one said a word, because nothing needed to be added. The ride back from the cemetery was quieter. The engines still roared, but the noise felt different now. Not heavy, not loud, just steady, like the sound of hearts still beating through layers of memory. Riders peeled off in 2s and 3s as they passed through town, offering silent nods or brief waves before heading back to their own roads, their own lives. At the clubhouse, the remaining members gathered for coffee, small bites, and stories that weren't always about the past. Sometimes they were just about the weather, or a good stretch of road, or a tune that played too loud on the radio. But beneath every word was a thread, a connection that didn't need explaining. Emily sat on the worn leather couch in the corner, her notebook full, her heart full, and her thoughts still unfolding. She had come to write about a motorcycle club. Now she wasn't sure where that story ended and her own began. Tyler approached, this time with none of the guardedness he'd carried before. He sat beside her, helmet in hand, and said, "You coming back this summer?" Emily looked up, surprised. You want me to? He shrugged, a half smile on his face. We could use help with the outreach program. Someone who knows how to tell stories, right? She glanced across the room where Jack was laughing, really laughing with Mike and Walter over something that probably wouldn't have been funny to anyone outside their circle. She saw Susan in the corner, sewing a new patch for a younger rider who'd joined last month. And she saw Tyler, this time not as the guy who'd questioned her from the start, but as someone who wanted the story to keep going. Emily nodded. Yeah, I'll be back. That night, as the sun dipped low and turned the clubhouse windows amber, she sat at her laptop, opening the file she'd been building since the day she first walked into that bar. 20,000 words, a document filled with voices, pain, courage, and connection. But more than that, a story about finding something sacred in the ordinary, about people who weren't saved by therapy or systems, but by each other. She titled it simply, Brotherhood, a Legacy in Motion. Outside, the sound of engines cut through the fading light. She stepped to the window and watched. Jack's Harley idled at the curb. Beside him, Mike's bike growled softly, the two men exchanging a look that said everything without a word. They rode off together, two old friends reclaiming miles that life had once taken away from them. And Emily stood at the window, smiling, one hand resting on the leather vest now hanging beside her door, the same vest that had once been her father's. Now, stitched with both their names, it waited for the next ride. Because some journeys never really end. They just keep moving forward, carrying everyone brave enough to hold on. And legacy, it isn't something we leave behind. It's something we carry, mile after mile, stitched into who we become.